Vidino bueno. Welcome to the first lesson of Ladino. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you all the alphabets and some words from them. So let's get started. So the first letter is Aleph. It gives the sound A, E, or O, depending on the nicode. However, we will learn about the nicode in the future lessons, and the word from it is armario, which means cabinet or closet. The next is bait. It gives the sound b, like in the word banca, which means bench. The next is wait. It gives the sound v, like in the word verdera, which means sidewalk or veranda. The next is gimel. It gives the sound g, like in the word garfon, which is a large bottle. The next is gimel. It gives the sound j, like in the word jugo, which means toy. The next is dalet. It gives the sound d, like in the word terkera, which means path or route. The next is a. It is silent letter. However, it gives the sound a or ah when nicode is used, but it always gives the sound of ah at the end of the word, like in the word escritorio, which means writing desk. The next is vav. It gives the sound v, u, or o, depending on the nicode, and the word from it is Osiko, which means small class. The next is Zine. It gives the sound Z, like in the word Zav, which means gold. The next letter is Jain. It gives the sound J, like in the word journal, which means newspaper. The next is Khed. It gives the sound H, like in the word Harshaf, which means sheet. The next is Het. It gives the sound H, like in the word Hoshach, which means darkness. The next is Tate. It gives the sound T, like in the word taburete, which means stool. The next is yod. It gives the sound y or sometimes e, like in the word yia, which means chair. The next is kaf. It gives the sound k, like in the word kapsa, which means metal box. The next is lamed. It gives the sound l, like in the word livraria, which means bookcase or bookstore. The next is lamed. It gives the sound l, like in the word llama, which means flame. The next is mem. It gives the sound like in the word mesa, which means table. The next is noon. It gives the sound n, like in the word noche mesica, which means nightstand. The next is noon. It gives the sound nya, like in the word niño, which means child. The next letter is samer. It gives the sound s, like in the word sapan, which means large metal tray. The next letter is ein. It is the guttural form of aleph. It gives the sound a, e, or u, depending on the niqud. The word from it is almuada, which means pillowcase. The next is pe. It gives the sound p, like in the word peshker, which means towel. The next letter is fe. It gives the sound f, like in the word fornica, which means fork. The next is tsadi. It gives the sound ts, like in the word sarafa, which means large earthen jar. The next is Chadi. It gives the sound ch, like in the word chocolata, which means chocolate. The next is cough. It gives the sound k, like in the word kona, which means khadal. The next is resh. It gives the sound r, like in the word reyo, which means ghatar. Unlike Hebrew, it is trill, like r. The next is sheen. It gives the sound sh, like in the word chiffon, which means sieve. The next is taw. It gives the sound t, like in the word tassa, which means cup. Now let's see the final forms of some letters. Half suffix. It is the final form of kaf. It gives the guttural sound h, like in the word melech, which means king. The next is mem suffix. It gives the sound like in the word shem, which means name. The next is noon suffix. It gives the sound n, like in the word wine. The next is pe suffix. It gives the sound f, like in the word aleph, which means thousand. The next is tsadi suffix. It gives the sound ts, like in the word ats, which means tree. The next is chadi suffix. It gives the sound ch, like in the word sandwich. So guys, let's wrap up. If you like this video, make sure to like, share and subscribe to my channel for upcoming videos. Merci mucho.